6 to 14 seconds. That's about how long it takes for someone to lose consciousness when they're being strangled. If the victim can, they'll fight like they've never fought before. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, how is it possible that one man was able to strangle to death 23 healthy male victims in the state of Louisiana? Almost every one of them was streetwise, men with histories of violence. Some of them were experienced criminals. The autopsy showed none of them had been drugged. The last thing they had seen were the eyes of a man who somehow gained control over them. So how had the killer done it? The police assumed that they were hunting an apex predator, a human wrecking ball, as frightening as he was utterly ruthless. That was the theory. It couldn't have been further from the truth. It was the summer of 1997, and 19-year-old David Lavon Mitchell Jr., known to his friends as Tweety, had gone missing from St. Charles Parish just outside New Orleans. His body was found 2 days later just off the highway among the brush and trees on River Road, Hahnville. His pants were down, his body partly submerged in stagnant ditch water. A tragedy? Yes. But murder? Not according to the police at a press conference. They said the cause of David's death was likely misadventure related to him living a high-risk lifestyle. But then in December, the body of 20-year-old Gary Pierre was found, again in St. Charles Parish, left out in the open among rural farmland surrounded by alligator-filled swamps and marshes, not too far from where David Mitchell Jr. had been found. The police and the media said the same thing about Gary: drugs, alcohol, high-risk lifestyle, all things that were sadly too common in the economically depressed St. Charles area. But that explanation got harder to believe when another body was discovered. Larry Ranson was older than David and Gary at 38 when his body was discovered on July 31, 1998, near Hahnville. The sheriff's office again reported that the victim had died due to his high-risk lifestyle, but a sure pattern was forming. 3 men, all dead and found in rural locations. If it was murder, though, surely the killer would have just thrown the body into a nearby river or fed it to the alligators in the swamps, right? That is what the police claimed, but they were wrong. Very wrong. The reason the killer hadn't hidden the bodies is that he wanted them to be found. The killer wanted recognition for his work. This was a game to him, and he was just getting started. In October, 2 more bodies were found, this time just a short drive away from St. Charles. The first was discovered in the unincorporated community of Metairie, and it belonged to 27-year-old Oliver LeBanks. He was found in a secluded area below an underpass. He would later become the most crucial victim in the case. His relatives told the police that he'd recently taken up prostitution after being fired from his job for taking drugs. When homicide detectives viewed the body a day after it'd been dumped, there was a leather belt strapped around the man's neck. Murders weren't unusual in this part of the USA. In the late 90s, the New Orleans metropolitan area had the highest or one of the highest per capita homicide rates in the country. But for Detective Lieutenant Dennis Thornton, these didn't look like regular murders. Because when the earlier cases were reviewed, the high-risk lifestyle story turned into something very different. Soon, the police issued a public statement. Death by misadventure was now reclassified to murder. The forensic evidence showed that there had been serious sexual misconduct, and the bruises on the necks of the victims were signs of torture. The man who had assaulted and killed them had likely worn a condom for all but LeBanks. He might not have hidden his victims well, but he was forensically aware. 15 days after LeBanks was found, 16-year-old Joseph Brown was discovered half-dressed on a patch of land in Kenner, a 15-minute drive from Metairie. It was the same MO, a sexual attack during or before death by strangulation. There was now little doubt in Detective Thornton's mind that this was the work of a serial killer. 5 African-American men, all dumped and strangled, all victims of a sexual attack. And in the parlance of profilers, it was starting to look like the killer might have had a signature. He'd left some of the victims with their pants around their ankles and had taken some items of clothes. Was he posing them and taking trophies? Local detectives contacted the FBI. An agent wrote up a short profile based on the evidence so far. The killer was white, he was poor, and he didn't have much of an education. That wasn't much use to Thornton. Poor, white, and uneducated, at least 1 million men in the state of Louisiana fit that description. Then came the first big break in the case. The coroner called about Oliver LeBanks. A tiny hair had been found stuck to his skin. It came from a Caucasian person, and there were ligature marks on his wrists. That would explain how the killer had been able to sexually assault and strangle him without any obvious signs of a fight. Thornton had the hair, now he needed a suspect to match it to. On the day LeBanks had gone missing, he had been hanging out in New Orleans with his girlfriend, his brother, and some friends. They had split up and LeBanks had gone off with his friends to Rawhide, a bar on Burgundy Street. New Orleans was just a short drive from where his body was later found. It was very likely LeBanks had met the killer while he was partying and they'd gone off together. Surely someone must have seen them. So Thornton went bar hopping with a photo of LeBanks to show customers. Nothing. So he hit the streets and he started asking local drug addicts and prostitutes. Again, nothing. Almost a month later, the body of 18-year-old Bruce Williams was found, another black man dumped in an industrial park not too far from downtown New Orleans. But this time, the killer had assaulted and murdered him and then taken the time to redress him. Williams was well known around town for being something of a hustler. He could take care of himself in a fight. So Thornton asked himself the same question he'd asked before. What kind of special power did the killer have that he could so easily overcome tough young men? He got back into touch with the FBI's behavioral science unit. The profile he was given remained the same: male, poor, white, uneducated. But there was an update. The killer was a local man. He most likely lived near the airport. The profiler explained that serial killers usually dump bodies where they know the area. Most of the bodies had been left on roads easily accessible from the airport. That narrowed it down, but not by a lot. Little did Thornton know, so far every detail the FBI had provided him about the killer's profile was right on the button. He was poor, and white, and uneducated, and he lived near the airport. It would turn out that the FBI profile was spot on. The killer was hiding in plain sight. He lived in a trailer park just 13 miles from the airport, surviving paycheck to paycheck. At night, he would prowl the streets of New Orleans while the city was buzzing with music. He targeted young men hustling on the corners. When they looked at him, they didn't see a dangerous killer. They saw someone pathetic, a shy, socially awkward loser, an easy mark for a few quick dollars. And that's how he met Manuel Reed, 21, an African-American man who was found dead in Kenner on May 30th, 1999. Reed had been sexually assaulted, strangled like the others, and then placed in a dumpster. The MO hadn't changed. Then in June, he murdered a homeless man, 34-year-old Angel Mejia. The coroner wrote, "Death by asphyxia due to strangulation." This time the killer had left the body lying next to a dumpster, again in Kenner. Detectives were sure he was local, but they couldn't figure out why he was leaving his victims in places they could be easily found. Was he taunting them? So far, the case had been kept under wraps. That's usually how it works when police are actively investigating a serial killer. The less he knows about who's after him, the more he might walk into a trap or make a mistake. But that advantage was lost when someone leaked the investigation to the media. A local newspaper ran a story that said at least 3 men had been murdered, maybe more, over the past 8 months. The last 2 victims had apparently known each other, and both were known to wander the streets at night selling drugs. The killer now knew that they were actively investigating his crimes, and he was pleased. He was getting some recognition for his work. The game had changed, but he wasn't about to stop killing. It was barely 2 months before he killed again, this time 34-year-old Mitchell Johnson, a muscular black male he dumped into one of his old haunts, Metairie. His body was found just a few feet from where police had found LeBanks, but this time he had made a mistake. Someone had seen him. They gave a description to the police, and soon a composite sketch appeared in the newspaper. Mid-30s, overweight, receding hairline, big puffy cheeks. The sketch was accurate. For the first time, the killer had a reason to worry. Ronald J. Dominique was 33 in 1999 and lived about 13 miles from New Orleans International Airport in the small community of Butte in St. Charles Parish. Severely obese, a condition that made it hard for him to walk without a cane, he was soft-spoken, socially awkward, meek, and sickly. He certainly didn't give the impression of a violent maniac. In fact, he looked so harmless to others that it gave him a shield of invisibility. Dominique hadn't had much of an education. He'd grown up in trailer parks and as an adult lived paycheck to paycheck, taking whatever kind of work was available. He was currently employed as a security guard in Butte, but he quit that job and moved out of his apartment, heading about 32 miles to the city of Houma. He settled on Bayou Blue Road, a trailer park near canals, fields, and swamps. Neighbors in the trailer park didn't suspect that Dominique might be a criminal on the run. He seemed like a really nice guy, so nice that when he set up his trailer, the neighbors helped him connect the electricity and water. He got some low-paid work and blended into the community, always ready to offer a helping hand as he shuffled around on his aluminum walking cane. It was ideal. Many of the locals were functionally illiterate, so it was unlikely they'd read the newspaper article with his sketch about the serial killer. He could pick up where he left off. In what was an American heartland of abject poverty, there were plenty of poor young men living in shacks on the outskirts of town. 23-year-old Michael Vincent was one of them. On New Year's Day, 2000, he was found dead off the highway in Lafourche Parish, his strangled body dumped in the brush just off the main road. At first, it looked like the murder might have been drug-related. They found several rocks of crack cocaine in Vincent's pockets, but why didn't the killer take them if this was over drugs? Dr. Susan M. Garcia, a forensic pathologist, soon put that theory to bed. She found tiny red spots in Vincent's eyes, like burst blood vessels. This can happen when someone is strangled, and he had ligature marks on his wrists. He hadn't overdosed or been beaten up, so it was almost certain that someone had strangled him to death. Detective Thornton figured the killer might have moved on to a new hunting ground, probably because of those newspaper articles. But as things stood, the state had barely given the case any attention. Poor black men, dealers, prostitutes, and addicts. It wasn't a high priority. Thornton was more or less on his own for now. He'd already spent months going through the records trying to find someone who matched the FBI's profile. The problem was, literally thousands of men with rap sheets could fit that profile in Louisiana. One of them was a perfect fit. Thornton just didn't know it yet. Dominique had been arrested in 1985 when he was 21. Already something of a social outcast, he'd been fined $75 by the state for making phone calls to strangers, harassing them with obscene language. That wouldn't have stood out for Thornton, and neither would the second incident in which Dominique had fallen foul of the law due to drunk driving. It wasn't until 1993 that Dominique showed his true colors. Little is known about the case, but the available information shows that a young man had gone to the police accusing Dominique of serious sexual misconduct. For reasons not clear, the officers didn't believe him and Dominique wasn't charged. But in 1996, a half-naked young man was seen jumping out of the window of Dominique's sister's house. Witnesses later testified the man had shouted, "He is trying to kill me." The man would later tell the police Dominique had assaulted him and attempted to murder him. It was a serious crime that could potentially lead to a decade or more behind bars, but Dominique spent just 3 months in jail. The case was later dropped and he was released. Thornton couldn't figure out why, and little did he know the man that was giving him sleepless nights would soon be in police custody. In 2002, Dominique assaulted a woman in a parking lot. He accused her of hitting a stroller with a baby inside with her car. Dominique was irate. At the time, he was already in the middle of a killing spree, but he couldn't control his rage. He struck her in the face. The woman filed a complaint, but the case was dismissed after Dominique agreed to join the parish offenders program. He was right under their noses all this time, killing in plain sight. But to everyone who knew him during this period, Dominique seemed harmless, just a quiet guy without many friends. By day, he worked long hours at the local produce plant. At night, he delivered pizzas. On the weekends, he cleaned elderly people's yards for free. In the evenings, he volunteered, reading out bingo numbers. He even did grocery runs for older residents who couldn't manage on their own. To the people in those low-income communities, he was a sweetheart. He did all those nice things even though he had health problems of his own and could barely walk. For 2 years, Dominique laid low, but during this time, he'd gotten to know the local hustlers and dealers on the streets while he was delivering pizzas. He soon moved his trailer to a new spot right near the Dixie shipyard. To get there, you had to travel over dirt roads, past the bayou and the swamps. It was literally in the middle of nowhere. He was ready to start again. It was October 2002 when he met 20-year-old Kenneth Randolph Jr. His body was found in a cane field in Lafourche Parish. The pathologist noted that he'd been strangled and someone had tied his wrists. For the last 2 years, Detective Thornton had wondered if the killer had stopped, but now it was clear the Bayou Strangler was back in action. In that same month, Dominique murdered 26-year-old Anoka Noka Jones. Noka was selling drugs when Dominique pulled up in his car and asked for a chat. Noka brushed him off, saying he was heading to the store for cigarettes, that they could talk later. He went back home, spoke to his girlfriend, Shelley, and he told her he was just stepping outside for a smoke. But Noka never came back. All Shelley could tell the police was he had met some man in the street and popped out. Again, the killer had made no attempt at all to hide the body. He was still playing games. At first, the local cops had thought that he might have been killed over drugs, but that changed once the autopsy was complete. It was the Strangler again, no doubt. For Detective Thornton and the Houma police, it was a puzzle. What trick did this guy use to get very streetwise men like Noka to go off with him? They were still contemplating this when more bodies started showing up. Detrell Woods, 19, was found on May 24, 2003. His badly decomposed body was found dumped on a dusty road not far from where Dominique had first set up his trailer. Detective Thornton was now consulting with the Houma Police Department, namely Detective Don Bergeron. Bergeron was used to regular street violence and sex crimes, but a serial killer? This was new territory. 7 months passed, and then in October 2004, 2 bodies were discovered in quick succession. Larry Matthews, 46, and 21-year-old Michael Barnett, found dumped in the open again in Bayou Blue. In February 2005, another victim was found, 22-year-old Leon Lirette. But this was different. He was white. Serial killers usually follow patterns. They prey on certain types of people. The Bayou Strangler bucked that trend. Skin color didn't matter. In April, 2 more bodies were found. 31-year-old August Watkins, a black man, but Kurt Cunningham, 23, was white. They were both found in Lafourche Parish. The Bayou Strangler was fast becoming one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, but somehow the story was barely reported by the media outside of Louisiana. Detective Thornton was getting nowhere with the case. What was the killer's method? How did he get victims into the car and put the binds on them without drugging them? Dominique almost always preyed on men with criminal pasts. They were easy targets. He'd tell them he had something that they'd want to see back at his trailer. Drugs, alcohol, pornography. If they were prostitutes, he'd pay to have sex with them. Once they were at the trailer, he'd overplay how frail he was, telling him all about his failing heart and the fact that he could barely walk without an aid. Dominique was unhealthy, but he was cunning, and he was strong. But all the victims saw was a lonely man with money to spend. So when he told them he'd give them cash if he could tie them up and take Polaroids of them, they didn't for a second think that they were in danger. Some of these men were seasoned drug dealers. They had grown up fighting. They weren't scared. But once they were in the binds, they quickly realized that this large man's overweight body hid plenty of muscle. Dominique would grab their throat. He would abuse them. He'd usually strap a cord or a belt around their neck, and then he would strangle them as they tried to scream. Dominique had lived a kind of double life ever since he was a kid. Growing up in the trailer park where his family lived, he came across as harmless but odd. It was as if he was always in conflict with himself. The fact was, he didn't want to admit he was gay. Even as an adult, when he would dress up and drag at a local gay bar, he wouldn't admit it. His denial made him difficult to approach. He seemed innocent enough, but underneath, there was something sinister about him. And that's what the cops just couldn't see. The killer was the opposite of what they were envisioning him to be. But Thornton now had another lead. A few people had come forward and said that they might have seen some of those men in the passenger seat of a white truck, possibly a GMC Sonoma. If that was true, this would narrow his search down even more. There had now been 18 victims, but the national media still wasn't talking about it. This infuriated Thornton. If the story blew up, he'd be allocated resources, but it was as if no one cared. But eventually, the state gave Thornton what he wanted. A task force was set up, 14 detectives from 6 parishes. Thornton would play a major role because he had spent so long on the case, and they were joined by FBI agents Don Bergeron and her boss. They went over all the evidence, analyzing every crime scene. If the killer struck again, which they thought he would, the crime scenes would be investigated the exact same way. They'd use the same lab for evidence and, if possible, the same pathologist. They even managed to lift prints from Kurt Cunningham's skin. They seemed to be making progress, but the killer struck again. Alonzo Hogan, 28 years old, black male, found fully clothed on July 2, 2005, in a cane field in St. Charles Parish. Then another, Wayne Smith, 17, a black male found on August 16th in a ditch. Bodies left out in the open, victims from small towns, tiny parishes where people knew many of the others in the community. This was becoming an embarrassment for law enforcement. Then, some actionable information came their way. The killer had almost certainly picked up 3 or even 4 of his victims at the Sugar Bowl Motel in Houma. It was well known for drugs, prostitution, and the occasional act of violence. It was just a case of watching who went in and out. But to be sure, they had put up a roadblock in the area. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was wait. And then disaster struck. Hurricane Katrina, a Category 3 hurricane, caused more than $100 billion in damages and left over 1,800 people dead. People were suddenly living without electricity. Millions were made homeless. Some headed to the parishes where a maniac was strangling men. In September, another body was found, 40-year-old Chris DeVille. For the task force, the only thing different with this one was DeVille came from a stable family. His brother had been a cop. After Katrina, he hitchhiked to Houma, where he had been murdered. This wasn't the Strangler's style, but when they found DeVille lying dead in a ditch, they suspected it was him. The problem was the body was already badly decomposed, so they couldn't be sure. But the man they were hunting was about to make his first mistake, and it was a big one. Dominique was out driving when he spotted a young black man, John Banning. He was a street guy, a dealer, currently on parole, the perfect target. But there was something different about Banning. His parole officer was on the Bayou Strangler task force, a lucky coincidence that was about to change everything. Banning saw an overweight white man with thinning hair shouting at him and waving something through the window of the car. Dominique prided himself on being able to tell almost instantly when someone was gay. He knew Banning was straight, so he used his straight guy trick. The thing that he was waving out the window was a photograph of an attractive nude woman. "You want to sleep with her?" Dominique asked when Banning walked over. "Sure, why not?" And Banning got into the passenger side of a white GMC Sonoma, the exact car witnesses had told Thornton about. Dominique's trailer was no longer at the shipyard. He had gotten bored out there all alone and moved it to his sister's house. When they got there, Banning looked around. No way would this guy be friends with an attractive woman. The place was a mess. There were jugs of urine sitting on the floor. It was October, and last year's Christmas decorations were still up. But what really unnerved him were the stacks of gay pornography everywhere, piles and piles of it. Banning ran for the door and didn't look back. He didn't stop until he reached the highway where he hitched a ride back to Houma. He'd been about 5 minutes away from becoming another victim of the 21st century's most prolific American serial killer. The task force was already aware that given how often the Strangler killed people, some of his victims would have likely gotten away. They'd scoured case files trying to find any records where someone had escaped the clutches of a man about to put them in binds. But they found nothing. They later realized that they hadn't looked at the records of parolees. And it just so happened that one man on the task force, Detective Tom Lambert, had about 50 parolees he was overseeing. Detective Thornton and Bergeron asked him to find anyone in his files who had an experience of some guy propositioning them for sex and or bondage. And that's how they found John Banning. Banning told them everything. He said a, quote, fat white guy had promised that he'd fix him up with a gorgeous white girl. "So I got in the truck," he told detectives. And yes, he could remember exactly where the trailer was located. Lambert, Thornton, and Bergeron got into their cars and headed to the spot. There they found the trailer still parked outside of Dominique's sister's place in Bayou Blue. Bergeron went straight to the mailbox where she pulled out some letters. The name on one of them was Ronald J. Dominique. Could this really be the Bayou Strangler? After 8 years of sleepless nights, Thornton felt a glimmer of hope. He possibly had the killer's hair. He might have his prints. He likely had a witness. And now he might have the man himself. They knocked on the trailer door, and they were soon met by an uneducated, local white man who looked like he didn't have much money. Profile, check, check, check. Back at Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, the detectives made it clear Dominique wasn't a suspect. A lie, of course. That's how it worked. They watched his facial muscles when they told him they were looking for a serial killer, a strangler of men. Dominique barely flinched. Thornton pushed a button on the tape recorder. He asked Dominique about the incident with Banning, that he had tried to tie him up. Dominique didn't deny it. He said he was gay and it was just a sex game. Thornton looked into Dominique's eyes and he told him straight. They had DNA evidence. They needed to take a sample so they could remove him from the suspects list. A few minutes later, a forensics guy was pushing around a buccal swab inside Dominique's cheek. Everyone in that room knew if this matched the DNA found at the crime scene, he was done. If he really was the Strangler, at long last they'd figured out his trick. For gay men, he probably used the lure of sex and drugs. For prostitutes, money. For straight guys, hot women, pornography, and booze. They also now had his criminal record files, the phone calls he'd once been arrested for. But what stood out, of course, something they shouldn't have missed in the past, were the sexual assault cases. One dismissed right from the get-go, and the other he spent 3 months in jail for before the state dropped it. If Dominique was the killer, the United States justice system had failed in its duty to protect two men. They were sure Dominique was their man. Everything fit, but there was still not enough to charge him. The concern now was the longer they waited, the higher chance Dominique would kill again. He was more than capable of piling up corpses in a short space of time. They set up another roadblock out near the Sugar Bowl Motel just in case he went back there to find another victim. Would he really murder more men while he was under suspicion? On November 9th, less than a month later, a 21-year-old named Nicholas Pellegrin was found dead. A few days earlier, Dominique had turned up at Pellegrin's house to read the electricity meter. Pellegrin was doing some repairs when the guy offered him a deal. A little fun. Pellegrin knew what this was, but he was broke. "Come back later," he said. That evening, Dominique pulled up outside the house. 4 days later, Pellegrin was found dead with his clothes in some brush in Lafourche Parish. His body violated, ligature marks on his wrists. The autopsy showed there was a laceration on his head. He'd likely been hit before his killer had strangled him. But again, they couldn't be absolutely certain that this one was the work of Dominique. Not long before Pellegrin was killed, he received death threats from local drug dealers for not paying back a debt. But if it was the Strangler, that meant 22 victims. Thornton and Bergeron were in shock. How did he get through their roadblock? It wasn't too far from Dominique's trailer. They knew his hunting grounds, but he still managed to get past them without being seen. Again, he'd left no forensics evidence at the crime scene, and they still hadn't got the results back from Dominique's DNA test. A few days later, good news arrived. The human hair found on Oliver LeBanks was a match, but a mitochondrial match, not nuclear. Enough to say the DNA belonged to Dominique's blood relatives, but not enough to say it was his without a doubt. In a court of law, this would matter. It wasn't enough to press charges, but it persuaded the state to pile in a lot more resources. The net was closing in. As for Dominique, he should have never moved that trailer. It had been a bad idea from the start. There was a church near his sister's home, so there was a good chance someone might see him or hear the screams of his victims. Out near the shipyard, this hadn't been a problem. He'd been able to take his time with the victims, but at his sister's, he had to do it quickly. Getting bodies out of the trailer was a problem. He had to drag them in plain sight to his car, and now the cops were on to him. He wasn't going to stop, but he had made life hard for himself. With more resources, the task force set up a surveillance room in the church. They could watch Dominique come and go. They were able to eavesdrop on anything he said there. They had scopes fitted with night vision. A helicopter buzzed overhead, so whenever he left his trailer, he'd be followed and photographed. This is how it should have been from the moment they had him as a suspect. But surely, no way was he going to kill again. The task force was confident that it was game over for Ronald Dominique. They started to build their case. 22 victims. They had to tie them all to him. They created timelines for each murder, trying to match them with Dominique's movements, his house locations, his jobs, and the possible witnesses. They had to get this right. Fail and Dominique might invoke double jeopardy. Then more good news arrived. They got another possible DNA match. This time it was from semen found in Angel Mejia's body. The strongest DNA evidence was still the hair. They worked day and night. They trailed him in unmarked cars, sometimes losing him when he put his foot down and made sharp turns. The helicopter absent that day. He'd been gone an hour or two, and all they could do was wait and wonder if he was out killing again. But serial killers barely ever just quit. When the net closes in on them, they usually become reckless. They escalate until they're dead or in prison. And that was the case with Dominique. On October 15, 2006, almost a year after Dominique's last murder, the body of 27-year-old Christopher Sutterfield was found. The killer had made no attempt to hide the body, but if it was Dominique, at least he had made the effort to venture further out, about a 2-hour drive from Bayou Bleu and Houma. Thornton went to look at the body and make certain that it was one of Dominique's. It was still fresh. The coroner wrote the victim's cause of death had been asphyxiation by strangulation after the victim's clothes were removed. It was Dominique for sure. It had to be. But there was no DNA evidence found anywhere at the crime scene. They couldn't let Dominique roam free. It was too dangerous. The case still needed fine-tuning, but it was a risk they couldn't take. They called a judge in Jefferson Parish and asked for 2 first-degree murder warrants, one for Manuel Reed and the other for Oliver LeBanks. LeBanks was the strongest case. It was a gamble charging Dominique now, but they had no choice. He wasn't going to stop until he was behind bars. After everything that had happened, Dominique's sister finally forced him to leave her property. He was now staying at a flop house when an entourage of detectives, local cops, and the media arrived. Cameras flashed. Local newspaper and TV news reporters watched on as Thornton pushed Dominique into the back of a car, Bergeron sitting next to him. He was guilty, but would a jury see it that way? Or would they see a frail, poor, uneducated man beloved by his community? 23 bodies. They wanted a confession for them all. Dominique's total body count was now up there with the worst of the worst: John Wayne Gacy at 28, Ted Bundy at 35, Gary Ridgway at 49, and Dean Corll. The case should have shocked America. It should have broken the internet, but even when he was in handcuffs, the reaction was at worst indifferent, at best subdued. But in those early interviews, Dominique admitted to killing LeBanks. He said that he'd picked him up in the French Quarter of New Orleans and they'd agreed to have sex. How was it possible that not one person had seen Dominique with LeBanks that night? But that was Dominique's superpower. He was Mr. Nobody. He claimed LeBanks had pulled a knife and he held it to his neck. Dominique said he then grabbed a tire iron and hit LeBanks, knocking him unconscious. Afterwards, consumed with fear, he strangled him to death with a safety belt. I just pulled it around and next thing I know, he wasn't breathing. He was claiming he was the victim, that it was related to his PTSD, trauma from severe abuse. He claimed his victimhood went way back to childhood, but the worst of it happened when he was in jail and he'd been sexually assaulted by prisoners. The injuries he sustained, or so he said, were partly the reason he attacked his victim. It was the only way he could ensure he had control. That's exactly what he used as his excuse when he eventually confessed to all 23 murders. He said that all his adult life, he'd been desperate for sex. The binds gave him control, and killing his victims ensured he got away with forcing himself on them. And after what had happened to him in prison, there was no way he'd allowed himself to be sent back. He also claimed that if the guys had refused to be constrained, he would let them go. The others needed the cash. What he was alluding to was some of the guys had brought it on themselves. He described the murders in detail, every last one. He took the detectives to the dump sites, to the exact places the men had been found, places that only he would have known. Not for a second did he express remorse or shame. Thornton and Bergeron weren't fooled by his victim narrative. Dominique was a violent sadist and sociopath, an evil man who had taken innocent men from their families. In 2008, he accepted a plea bargain to avoid a death sentence and received 8 life sentences after being found guilty of 8 of the murders. He'll spend the rest of his days in the hellhole of Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. Dominique proved that a serial killer doesn't always look like a monster. He weaponized pity and hid behind a walking cane. But decades earlier, police hunted the physical nightmare the Louisiana detectives originally feared. The press simply nicknamed him the Gorilla Killer, and he used savage, animalistic violence to rip across an entire continent. Click the video on your screen right now to step inside his mind and discover the fatal mistake that finally brought his terrifying rampage to a dead stop.